So Alan Morrison and Mark Auska I've known for ages. Alan was, amongst many other things, was in on the first, we call it the Estes Park group. We went up to the Rocky Mountain National Forest and got together with a bunch of thought leaders and tried to imagine what we thought this data-centric architecture might look like. And that was like 4 or 5 years ago. It's been growing out ever since. And Mark Auska worked with us for several years, can articulate this stuff, understands it incredibly well. I'm very excited to hear what they have to say. They're both very articulate speakers and thought leaders, and looking forward to it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alan Morrison, recently retired from PwC, and I've been working with Semantic Arts for a number of years now on Data-Centric and try to help them out to the extent I can. So I've got an analyst background, and I'm going to be presenting with Mark Auska, who's a veteran of the data management and architecture space. So I think Mark's going to get started first with a presentation about lowering barriers to entry for the data-centric space.
Change is hard in two notable ways. First is the technology, the new way to solve an old problem, or perhaps a solution to an entirely new problem. Second is engaging humans to embrace a new approach or to take action in a new problem space. And Alan and I are speaking to you today with the question in mind of why are there barriers to entry and what can we do to smooth them out, to have data-centric and these technologies that we'll be talking about adopted more quickly. So one thing that we do as technologists is we inadvertently create barriers. We don't want to be doing that, but it's really hard to escape some of them unless you're thinking about it. So hopefully I can help you think about it today. The target that we're trying to replace should be a no-brainer, because the amount of time and effort that is put into the application-centric approach is something that we should be able to just push out of the way and move forward when data-centric comes along. As Dave just said, it's inevitable that this technology is going to move forward. Another thing that we do is we create confusion. We assume that the people to whom we speak understand what we're talking about, and oftentimes they don't. And since they don't know what we're talking about, they kind of drift off and then we've lost them. So let's not do that either. We'll talk about a couple examples. So here's a sales brochure from the Ford Edsel, which is a car that failed pretty miserably. This is a case study around this. And I like this slide because what it shows is that when they introduced this vehicle, they had 18 different models. And over in the corner in a little bit of text, they just kind of offhandedly mentioned that they have a bunch of new technology in this offering. And in fact, they did have some really innovative technology in the Edsel. Sadly, they obfuscated anything that you might learn about the technology by having this scattershot approach. This case study that we're going to go through briefly is one of Bill Gates' favorite case studies. Points out all kinds of failures that we can make. So one of them is, don't ignore your research. Initially, people thought that the Ford Edsel failed as a result of them not having done enough research to understand what the market was going to be for the vehicle. And that's not the case. They did more market research than typically gets done, particularly at that time. Now, of course, we go crazy with it. What they did is they did the market research, but the engineers didn't particularly care for what they were hearing. And they were more interested in putting it out there saying, look, this is the perfect vehicle. There's no way we can't win with this. We're just going to shoot from the hip and do it our way. So they had the research, but they ignored it, and it didn't work out for them. So we saw on that first slide showing the 18 different models, there's no focus to the marketing campaign that they had out. When we put information out about products that people don't know about, we have to be real laser focused. What is the value proposition that we're trying to convince them is going to carry them forward and make them want our product? If we're not focusing the vision, then again, they kind of wander off because they don't really understand how it might help them. So when you run into challenges, it's really a good idea to have a plan B so that you've got another way to approach the situation and you don't have to go back to the starting blocks and figure out how to proceed in that, flat-footed fashion. Ford didn't do that. They didn't have a plan B because they were super confident that there was no possibility that this car wasn't just going to take over the world. Clearly that didn't work out. And then when it didn't work out, what did they do? The same thing over and over again. They kept jumping up and down. No, this is the technology that everyone will love. So at some point you have to admit failure and move on and stop wasting your time with a campaign or potentially a product. We all make mistakes, right? Maybe you've got a product that isn't going to work out. This is good for us to be aware of, particularly going into it, again, with that plan B, some other way to pivot onto something else. Very important concept. Now, I've been in the industry for a long time, and I'm confident that I've made every single one of these mistakes, probably more than once. So as we move forward, let's not make these kinds of mistakes. Now, what we're replacing is the application-centric view, right? This is where we've got all kinds of applications hiding the data. The data belongs to the application. And when we are trying to get our information, we have to do all of this work in the center there, that giant hairball. What is that? That's ETL. This is the integration between all the different applications that are locking our data up in their systems. And we spend more time on that hairball in the middle of this diagram than we do on any other single thing in our IT shops. Why do we do that? We do that because that's the way it's always been done. Data-centric makes that go away. But just because we have the technology doesn't mean that people are necessarily going to move for it. So how do we create confusion? Well, we come out and we say, hey, I've got this great product, and we put it out there, and people say, well, yeah, customers look at it and say, this is our problem. And you say, great, we integrate with that. And the customer says, what? What is that? Now, from the eyes of a graphic artist, I can look at this image and see that what we have here is a series of lines on a page. It creates an optical illusion. This is something that can't physically be built, but I can understand it as a graphic element. But if you're looking at it and someone is going to try to build this, there is no way that they can do anything with it. So creating confusion, not a good idea unless you're a pharmaceutical company. They have a business reason for creating confusion, and the confusion they create is they do all their marketing for their brand name. And then when it goes off patent, you can buy it as a generic for a lot less money, but you can't call it the brand name. So now they have these hard to pronounce and remember terms that represent what they had marketed under their brand name. In other words, they have a specific business intention for going in and creating some confusion to protect their bottom line. They're protecting their own investment with that. If you have a business reason for covering something up, well, that's probably not the right thing to say, but making it a little less clear or not real obvious, if there's a business reason for that, go for it. If there isn't a business reason for it, all you're doing is creating a barrier to entry. Not going to work out well for you. So I'd like to spend a little time. I've got a couple of case studies here I want to talk about. I also have a way that I think it might be a little easier for us to talk about semantics. I've had some good luck with this, if it makes sense to you. This is not the end all be all, but I think that I can demonstrate a pretty clear way to get the message across to people who don't yet drink the Kool-Aid. They don't know what it is we're talking about. So how can we take them from where they are to where we want them to be? So it's also key that words matter. And I'm going to close it with that, because if we don't have the words, we're not going to go anywhere. I have a little parable for you on that. So single focus. I worked for the Minnesota Department of Commerce, and there was a legally mandated report that needed to be produced every year that was the number of licenses that were issued by the agency. Now, this was used for budgeting, resource development, and everything. It turned out that the data in the system, and anybody with gray hair out there has certainly seen a lot of this, they just overwrote the date. And so over the course of time, all they could see is the number of licenses that were currently active. They couldn't see all the churn that happened in the meantime. Now, if you're talking about driver's licenses, they don't really change that much. But in this particular industry, they could change 2, 3, 5, 10, 15, 30, because every time somebody changed their insurance license, another brand of insurance, another offering, they have to change their license to do it. So there's all this churn that's going on. So no wonder the agency was having a hard time coming up with the resources to be able to get the work done. They were really, really struggling. So this was the single point of focus that we used to carry this project forward, is that, look, our data is not putting us in a situation to be able to get the funding to get this taken care of. We have to change the system for this, to be able to do this. And it was pretty much a data-centric approach. We didn't call it that back in those days, of course, but it really was. It was one center database, which made it really, really easy for us to be nimble. Options came along from off-the-shelf software, and people would see it and say, hey, how come ours doesn't do that? And we'd say, well, okay, in a little while it does. It was just very enthusiastically accepted. So some stories don't have a perfectly happy ending. This was the point in time when Jesse Ventura was the governor of Minnesota. And he decided that his capstone at the end of his term was to have online licensing, which is not what we were doing. Although we had everything to be able to just convert it from screen display to online, we were ready for that. But sent in a team of consultants, didn't talk to anybody, and moved on. And it took them 2 years to do what we could have done in 2 months, 3 months. So we already had everything done. It was just changing the interface to the internet. So you don't always get there, even if you have wild success. Another thing that we run into oftentimes is corporate resistance, where we know that we have a good solution and the organization should move in that direction, but we know there's no way we can make the sale. So I was brought into this organization as the enterprise master data architect. My job was to lay out the strategy for how master data would be done in the organization. And then once we got that settled, rolled out, people loved it. It looked like a good strategy. People were on board for it. Went to our first package implementation, package selection, I should say, and couldn't select the right package, the package that was actually head and shoulders more capable than any of the competitors through our screening process. Why is that? Well, we set up a bunch of barriers to our own success. First one was we selected the highest profile domain in the entire organization. When you're working with that domain that is the center of the entire organization, risk aversion pops up everywhere. No one wants to touch that. And so we couldn't get over that hump. The product was by a vendor that didn't currently have a relationship with the organization, and all the partners, different parts of the organization, like, we don't have anybody who has ever worked with that company, and we're not going to. So there was no way that we could move forward. I didn't at that time have a good enough story to say, look, I realized that it's going to be a big investment to move forward, but here's what we're going to be able to do with it. If I could have rolled out, to me, actually, if I could have rolled out a data-centric solution, which is my idea of what master data management always should have been, then we really have something, because we make the investment and, oh my goodness, we spend a ton of money and move ourselves into the future. Didn't have the story at that point, so couldn't really take care of it. This is the vision. You put the data in the middle, as we're going to be talking about this week, you've got something there. And in fact, it's not just a database sitting in the middle. There's an architecture that surrounds it so that the data can defend itself. There's model-driven capability. This is what we need to move to so that we have the data securely protected at the center of our organizations, rather than scattered thither and yon behind every application that we decide there's an app for that, and come along and just shoot ourselves in the foot. So keep it simple. This is how I like to talk about semantics with people who are not particularly engaged in it, don't really understand what it can be. So people use language. This is how we've communicated for millennia. We're savants at doing this. This is what we do every day, in and out, all day long, have forever. So with this language, a little bit of analysis turns up, and most people saw this in grammar school. You've got subject, predicate, object. That's a triple. So we've got this simple little structure that we use to communicate across eons, right? So after doing that for a while, some particular technologies came along to automate it. First of all was the printing press, movable type, so that we could mass produce the words that we had written on the page. Ada Lovelace came along, first computer programmer in 1843, way ahead of her time. Information theory was invented by a guy named Claude Shannon. What did he invent? He invented the bit. And the bit is the most atomic level information, meaning that you can store in a computer. And with that, he launched the information age. This is the date that that information age actually started, because now we can digitize that information. Well, when we're digitizing that information, we've got automation, now we structure it. People have gone wild with databases. Structure is a really good thing. So when we have our language automated, structured, now the internet comes along, we can distribute it internationally. We can send it around the world easily. Along with the internet, kind of hiding in the background for a while, came the semantic web. When we take a look at what we've done with language, apply all this technology that's gone along, semantic technology is doing something really amazing. What we're doing with it is we are digitizing meaning. Now that we have meaning digitized, we don't need to screw around with all the structure stuff that we've done with databases since databases were first put on the scene. So now that we have that, what's going to stop the data-centric revolution? I don't think there's anything that's going to stop it. So from language, we've digitized meaning. We now have the ability to move forward with a data-centric solution where our information is right there in the center of our organizations. Brilliant. So what could go wrong? Words matter. It's well known that bees communicate where the flowers are with a little dance. And so somebody set up an environment for bees that was only this tall. So there was no possibility that they could fly. So what happened? Well, the bees that were good at finding the flowers would go by scent. They would go out. They knew where they were, came back, did their little dance. No other bees could find it. Zero, none of them. They had no idea where the nectar was that they were supposed to go out and get. Well, why would that be? It would be because the worker bees had no way to say to the troops that they were directing to go get the nectar, and you have to walk. There was no vocabulary for it. There was no way for that meaning to be transferred from the bees that knew it, because they had just done it to find the flowers. They couldn't communicate that information to those worker bees that they were hoping to go out and carry forward their message. So my question for you to think about over the course of this forum: what vocabulary are you missing to make your point understood? Because if you don't have the meaning inserted into the brain of the people to whom you speak, they will have no clue how to proceed. So that's the main point that I want to leave you with. And with that, I thank you for your time. And let's hand it over to Alan. Alan is going to focus more on the technology landscape that we're looking at and what barriers might be possible within that environment.
Thanks, everybody, for attending today. We're going to look at adoption trends that are related to what Mark was talking about. So Mark did a nice job of teeing up the problem space, the struggles that enterprises have, as well as how to tackle those in general. And so I'm going to get more specific on the tech side, give you guys a few long-term drivers as well as near-term solutions, and then give you a long-term outlook. And I've only got a few minutes, so these slides have more detail when you need them. And so let's get started. So this is a driver, a nice 85-year-old driver, but it's not the kind of driver we're talking about. We'll be talking about technology drivers. And so the first driver I wanted to talk about was data as a service, which has evolved for many years. If you think about data as a service, credit scoring companies, for example, have 4,000 sources integrated using older methods, typically not using knowledge graph methods. And what we're seeing now is the explosion of data as a service with a knowledge graph backend. And so I'll be talking through a few slides on Google's Data Commons, because it's a prime example of what the new kind of data as a service is. It's actually a public nonprofit kind of data commons that Google has been behind, and RV Guha is the lead. If you go to Stanford's CS520 site, you'll see the talk that I'm referencing here. And Guha says that instead of just having a repository of data sets that people can access, this is a single unified database, Google Data Commons, created by normalizing and aligning the schemas and entity references across these different data sets. So basically, Guha is thinking about the data analyst with Data Commons and making things easier for the data analyst, making it a lot quicker to do quick correlations, for example. So you bring the data sets together, and it often takes days to bring data sets together and get them aligned, et cetera. Data Commons is designed to help you create a hypothesis in minutes using public sources. So the Guha example that he was using involved California and how many infections, the infection rate per capita between counties, along with compared with the median income of each county. And as you can imagine, correlation with the poorest county in California, Imperial County, having the highest incidence of COVID per capita. And you compare that with the richest county, which is Santa Clara County, where the valley is, and the lowest incidence per capita. So that's what Google Commons is designed to do. And the thing about Guha is he's somebody who's been around the RDF OWL world for many years. He was one of the co-creators of RDF. He's been behind schema.org, one of the people contributing to that. And now he's behind Data Commons. So the thing about it is that the Guha himself has sort of drifted beyond RDF, and that's one of the trends that I want to explore here. He has found that when you bring all these statistical aggregates together, that the predicates in RDF become incredibly long. And so the machines aren't able to tease them apart, the meanings in the predicates. So in Data Commons, even though they've got a virtual knowledge graph and they do support the semantic web standards, in actuality, they've got multiple backing stores, and he doesn't talk a lot about this in the talk, but I think he's got specific kinds of schemas that have to do with time, geography, measures, provenance for these multiple backing stores, and then a way to align those. And so that's what I would call pattern-based schemas. That there's an overarching meta language, if you will. So we'll be talking about meta languages for a minute at the end of this. The other big long-term trend I want to talk about is digital twins. Now, you've heard the term digital twin. What it refers to is a very rich online representation of the real world. So you've got people, places, things, and concepts that are represented in this online universe. And it's going to take 25 years, according to the experts, for digital twins and the whole mirror world, so-called, to evolve into a feasible, interactive, functional universe. So that's what we're working toward. And the UK in particular is thinking about digital twins inside of government, whole departments ultimately that could be twinned, cities that could be twinned. You can imagine smart cities need to be online as much as possible if you're going to manage like a smart city. And the big problem that the UK government is facing with its digital twin program is standardization. You see standardization right in the middle of this diagram here. And so the thing about standardization is it's not just migrating to RDF and OWL. It's all these different layers of tiers of standards that have been developed over decades, ISO standards, et cetera. So you can imagine the challenge that governments face, like the UK government, but they are headed in a path that's very data-centric to begin with. So fingers crossed it goes well for them. So a quick look at some near-term solutions, and Dave painted a really good picture of data-centric, and so we'll look at some personal knowledge graph use cases and where we're headed with those. Now I'm moderating a personal knowledge graph working group that Semantic Arts is hosting. And so we're looking primarily at 4 different use cases: personal data management, personal content management, knowledge management, and networked note-taking, as well as research. So if you go to datajournalism.com and read George Anadiotis' article on research management, he talks about getting the data out of the systems that we use, whether it's RSS readers or the browser, bookmarks, et cetera, making that data available to the knowledge graph. And putting it in the context of a researcher or journalist who has to manage that information. So one of our primary goals here with the personal knowledge graph is personal data protection, as well as personal ownership of data. So we're trying to get behind the decentralized identity notion and the personal data protection trends with this knowledge graph. So I think that it's an exciting space, and if you have any inputs or want to join our group, please let me know. A couple of quick points about the enterprise side. So the personal knowledge graph is the consumer side, which tends to go faster than the enterprise side in some cases, fewer barriers. And so that's one of the reasons we put together the working group. On the enterprise side, there's this middle ground that vendors are staking out, and you'll hear more about that during this conference, where you may not have you might not have the full capability of the RDF OWL stack, but you have companies like Timber that are building knowledge graphs in memory, for example, and they're using an extension of SQL that they've come up with that speaks a form of Sparkle, if you will, the semantic web query language for graphs, and it's very graph informed, and you can actually build ontologies using what appears to the user as SQL. And it's very big data analytics friendly. If you can see the querying tools that are available in Timber, it's a quick way to build a knowledge graph using tools that seem familiar to the analyst. Another example of the enterprise side of things that is really worth considering is neo-relational, and what I would call neo-relational. So we've had relational databases for many years, and we've been critical of relational databases for at least 10 or 20 years. And so there are companies like Relational AI that are being created that try to do relational the right way, in a relationship respectful way, in a relationship rich way. And so this is a tax example in front of you of how the information is ingested and how it flows to the user. And so relational AI is really kind of a knowledge graph management system you could think about. And so what's really compelling about this is that you've got virtual roles that RAI creates, so that you can have an ontologist role, you can have a business analyst role, you can have a data engineer's role, all with the same um, unified database foundation, and it's highly performant. So another example of a middle ground here, doesn't get you all the way with model-driven everything, but it is an example of a middle ground for data-centric. Okay, long-term outlook. So the data-centric outlook. I talked a bit about meta languages, and so what else is in the deck is a few slides about the meta languages that are emerging, and basically you've got these pattern-based schemas that could be another abstraction layer for modeling on top of what we already know and use. And of course, what's most mature and usable at this point is what we recommend within the semantic arts and web semantics community. So this is just an outlook to let you know where we think things are headed. Not everybody's going to use the semantic web stack, but all are trying to get forward in trying to do more things with knowledge graphs. So that's all I have today, and thanks for listening. And please do, I'll be in the session rooms afterward if you want to chat with me.